Hello and welcome to another episode of the Agency Leadership Podcast. I'm Chip Griffin.
And I'm Gini Dietrich.
Jenny, I need to figure out how to make some money. I just, it's crazy time. I got to figure it out.
Holiday time, you got to make some money. Get it?
Yeah, right after this. So we are creeping up on the end of the year here. Lots of folks are doing their year ahead planning and they're reading about how inflation is continuing. There's still the possibility of a recession and who knows what else 2023 might have to offer. So we thought we would talk today about how do we keep making money in this environment as an agency? How do we, not just generate revenue, but actually profits? And so that's our jumping off point for today, and we'll see where we wind up.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because I was going to say making money does not necessarily mean more revenue. It means profit.
Yes.
How do you make money?
And we beat that dead horse all the time because
we do.
Because still too many people come to us and say, hey, I need to grow my revenue by this, or I'm $1 million agency. I want to be a $2 million agency. What? No, let's focus on profit, please.
Right. Yeah. Please. And I think as part of that, there are lots of things that we can be looking at. Certainly raising your rates, making sure that you're not over-servicing, making sure that you're getting paid for the work that you're doing, making sure that you're considering a profit margin when you budget for new clients or for new projects, considering other alternative revenue streams. There's a lot of things that we can think about as we think about what to do in 2023 to continue to make money, even if the economy is shit.
Well, let's talk about raising rates, right? Because just before we came on air, I got an email from one of my vendors that, they're the 1700th vendor that I have that's raising prices on some software subscription that I have. So we're seeing lots of price increases that are taking effect now, in part because of everything that's going on economically, and in part because that just gives folks an excuse to do it. Maybe they've wanted to do it for quite a while.
Right.
And so agencies I know are coming to me, and I'm sure they're coming to you saying, hey, how do I increase my prices for my clients? Because everybody's raising my prices, and so that means my profit is going down. And the only way I can fix that is by going out and charging more. So I get that question a lot. And then, of course, the flip side is I also have a couple of clients who have been consistently raising rates as they should. And some are now getting some pushback from their clients saying, geez, we can't keep paying this higher rate. And so they're concerned maybe we've gone too high. So how do you find that Goldilocks point with your pricing, and how do you figure out how to raise prices, particularly on existing clients, which I think is probably the biggest challenge that most agencies have?
Yeah, it's really hard. This is totally an aside, but I am finally watching Emily in Paris, and it's about a marketing executive who goes to Paris, and it's campy and cheesy, but it's fun. The fashion is fun. But there's one episode where she talks about there's a company that's been with the marketing agency for 15 years, and they are still paying the same measly fee that they started with in the very beginning. And I think we all face that. It made me laugh out loud because that's actually a very real thing that a client starts with you when you start your business and they pay you $1,500 a month, $2,500 a month, $3,000 a month, like really small. And you continue to grow and their business continues to grow. And yet you continue to do more and more and more with them, but you're not getting paid the same amount that you would if it were a new client. And so I think that's like I said, it's kind of campy and cheesy, but it's a really good analysis of what we do. And I think that's really common. So there has to be a middle ground. And I think every client on earth understands that inflation has hit and understands that expenses have gone up and understands that we have payroll to make and all those kinds of things. I think it's less about raising your rates and more about how you message it. Because like you, I'm getting lots of emails from vendors saying we're going up, inflation, blah, blah, blah. And it pisses me off when they blame it on inflation, because it seems to me, like you said, an excuse or a reason to do it. If they handle it differently, I'm like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. So I think it's less about raising your rates and more about how you message it.
Oh, absolutely. And I won't admit this publicly, but I actually watched that show as well and had the same reaction when I saw that episode, I'm like, well, this is something that's accurate
Right.
on
It's
TV for once.
actually true. Yes.
And it is a problem that many agencies suffer from, because, and it's one of the reasons why I've said on this show and many other places before, that having long-term clients who always renew isn't always a good thing.
Right.
There should be some degree of attrition, because you're going to outgrow some clients if you're continuing to grow as a business, and that's just reality. But I think that the key is that you need to be, first of all, catching these things early, right? Because most of them
Yep.
happen because it's scope creep.
Yep.
And it is absolutely much more difficult to correct it 5 years after the fact than it is to correct it in the moment and say, look, we can't do this without having an amendment to our existing agreement, because this is just well beyond the scope we initially agreed to. When you try to go fix that years later, first of all, you've wasted years worth of profit. And it's also a more difficult conversation with the client, because the client's like, well, I don't even remember that, but we've been doing this forever. So why is
Right.
anything any different? And so I think when you're talking about raising rates on existing clients, the more that you can disconnect it from, hey, I'm just charging you more for the exact same thing, and the more that you can shift that into, we're going to do something different, or we're going to reevaluate the overall scope of the relationship, or we're going to do a strategic plan for 2023, and here's the cost of implementing it. The more that you can effectively obfuscate that price increase, the better. It's also important to remember that you can also have the same effect by doing less work.
Yeah.
So
for
so
sure.
you don't have to go to the client
Yes.
and say, I'm going to raise your price by 10%. You can find a way to do 10% less work and get to the exact same place from a profit place. So sometimes it can be just sitting down with a client and saying, hey, we've been producing this weekly report for years now. Does anyone even look at it?
Right.
Maybe not. Maybe you can cut that out, and maybe you save 2 hours a week. And so now you've got an effective savings, which puts more money to your bottom line. So you need to think creatively about how you're approaching this, and not necessarily go into it and say, hey, inflation, gotta pay
Right.
more.
Right. One of the things that we started doing, probably, I was right around the pandemic. So almost 3 years now. We went from annual plans to quarterly. And now that allows us to have that conversation every quarter to say, okay, and not only do we have to like make good on these kinds of things or whatever it happens to be, because we added all this other stuff in. Also, what happens is clients will say, oh, we really want to do this. We really want to do an industry survey, or we really want to add video, and we are like, great. And we actually keep a document that we call the popcorn list, and every client has access to it, to their own, and we put the ideas in there. And then when they say, let's do this, we go to the popcorn list and we're like, okay, great. Should we save that for next quarter, or do you want to try to insert it here, and how do we move things around? And it actually creates a different level of enthusiasm and excitement, because now they're involved in the planning process, and you can do it every quarter. So like right now we're recording this the first part of December. We're going through quarter one planning right now with clients, and they're really excited about, oh, we finally get to add in the video that we talked about, or we're finally going to do this industry survey, or we're going to launch this podcast that we've been talking about, because now we can do it into this next quarter. It's going to cost more, of course, but they're prepared for that conversation, and
Right.
they're excited about it.
Right. And it's healthy anyway, because one of the reasons why clients will often say that they've left an agency is because the agency was no longer being proactive. They were no longer
Right.
coming up with ideas. They were sort of coasting and resting on their laurels from the past. And whether or not that's true or not, and I will argue, in some cases it is true, because we were talking before the show, there is a tendency for agencies to start ignoring their older clients, particularly as they bring on new clients, because,
Sure.
hey, we all like the shiny new object,
Yep.
and it's a lot more fun than the one that's, we've been doing the exact same thing for 3 years. Part of the solution is, as you suggest, change up what you're doing. And so that shows that you're being, creative, inventive, and thoughtful for the client, but it also keeps things interesting for you and your team, so that you don't fall into this monotony of simply, churning out the same set of widgets week after week after week, which is not what most people signed up for agency life to do.
No, they signed up for the stuff that you were doing in the beginning that was really exciting. And doing it quarterly like that allows you to be able to be creative and do those kinds of things, even if it's not like an industry survey is not creative, but they feel like it's something new and
It's different.
interesting.
It's different.
Right,
Yeah.
right. But when you have an annual plan, first of all, the annual plan never gets worked. You never achieve the results that you think you're going to, because you stick it in a drawer and you just do the work. And to your point, you end up resting on your laurels. So the quarterly plan actually forces you to be engaged, really engaged, pretty consistently, because now you have to, not only do you have to show the results that you got for the previous quarter, but you have to show the results that you got, how you're going to amp those up and add on for the next quarter.
Right. Now, with that model, do you have sort of a preset fee that you're sort of moving around the puzzle pieces, or do you renegotiate your fee every quarter?
We have a preset fee that's sort of like the base retainer. And then if we're adding certain things on, like if we're going to add something big, like an industry survey, that's significant. So we will add that on.
Right.
Because the base retainer includes the stuff that you sort of have to do. You know, it's the blogging, it's the emails, it's the social, it's the stuff that has to happen. And then the ideas on top of that are created or renegotiated, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that's a smart way to do it, because you don't want to have to renegotiate the whole deal every quarter.
Right.
That's
Right.
burdensome to both sides and adds unnecessary risk. So, you know, but having that sort of that base level that you can then add ornaments to, if you will, and charge extra for them, which is important to remember to do that.
Right.
Because otherwise,
yes,
you're just robbing from yourself.
Uh-huh.
Now, if you're going to do that, and you know you're going to do that, just price right from the get-go, right? Set your retainer at a high enough level that you can give all these quote unquote freebies, because you realize that they're not free, that you've baked them into your cost of doing business. And I always encourage folks to look at, if you're going to overservice, plan for it in your price.
Yep.
And a lot of us, our nature is we want to overservice, we want to go that extra mile. Fine. Just plan that into your estimates for how much it's going to take to do the work, so that you can price appropriately.
Yeah, I mean, I am guilty of that too, and I'm definitely a people pleaser, so we do overservice, but I've gotten so good at including that in the price.
Right.
It's just covered in there. And I know that there's a certain amount of money every month that we're using to overservice.
Right. And it makes people feel good that you're not going and nickel and diming them and saying, well,
Right.
you know, I'd look at this, but I'm going to have to charge you a little extra for it.
Right.
Because
right.
even if it truly is just a little extra, it's that pain point. I think I've probably shared this story before, but the first agency that I worked with from the client side way back almost 30 years ago now, used to nickel and dime us for absolutely everything. And you'd get charged $1 per page for the fax, and you'd get charged for the taxi to go to lunch, which at the time was like $4, because the way that DC taxi cab fares are set up, or were set up back then, you could basically go anywhere downtown for $4, because the rates were approved by Congress, and well, they wanted to be able to go wherever they wanted. So Capitol Hill to anywhere downtown was $4. Anywhere else, and it was $1 million basically. But
right,
the heart of the city, you were all set. And to me, that was just, it was silly, it was nonsensical. Fortunately, we're way beyond those days of having those kinds of charges on most agency bills. But you still don't want to be in the business of having to say, well, this is going to be an extra $100 here, $100 there. Just figure out how to factor it into your pricing, and only have to go back to the client to ask for more for substantial new projects.
Yeah. And I think, going back to what we talked about at the very beginning, which is about messaging, that's the whole point of this. It's like, it's in how you message it. Like, we had a client's website go down probably about a month ago, and we called the web firm and said, hey, the website's down, we need your help. And they're like, okay, it'll be $1,500 for us to talk to you. And we were like, what? They're your client.
Right.
Their website's down. Like, isn't this your job? And they were like, no, it's not in the scope. $1,500 just to have the conversation. And so I called the client and I was like, listen, we can fix this on my end with my developers if you're okay with it. And he was like, yeah, do it. And so they lost the client because the website was down. We had to get it fixed. And they wanted to charge $1,500 just to have a conversation. And so we took them to my developers. Like, that was dumb. So remember that, like, when you're nickel and diming, or you're saying, well, it's going to be $1,500 to have a conversation, or it's $1,000 an hour to have this conversation because I'm dropping everything for you right now, that doesn't bode well. But when you make them part of the conversation and part of the planning, that's when you start to move things forward.
Yeah, and when you're trying to think about how do you continue to make money in an uncertain environment with all the things that are circling around us right now, part of that is focusing on client retention,
Yes.
And that's something we've talked about recently. But a piece of that is, how you're communicating these things with them, the impression that you're leaving, and frankly making sure that as you're out there and absolutely hunting for new business for the new year, that you're not neglecting to spend time and mental thought power for your existing client base, because you want to keep them, and not only do you want to keep them, you want to figure out how to grow them. I mean,
Right.
we started talking about raising rates, but it's not really about raising rates. It's about finding new opportunities. We can use the term upsell. I don't love the term upsell because that sort of implies, I think, getting someone to pay for something they don't really need.
Mm-hmm.
It's really trying to figure out how we can deliver the best service for the client and what more could we offer them. And it's not just saying, hey, I want to try to get an extra 10K out of this client. It's saying, hey, wouldn't it be great if we did this, going to your popcorn list idea, right? Here's an actual legitimate idea that we think makes sense, that would have value for the client, that we can do and we can do well. Let's go see if we can pitch that to them and win that additional piece of business, because you've already got the relationship there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I personally am very hesitant to say to a client at the end of the year, hey, we're raising our rates. I'm now, as our account executives, instead of 150 are now 175. Like, I'm not going to do that. I don't think it's right. I don't think it's the right way to do business. And I think it sends the wrong message. Maybe we do that internally. And as we're planning for quarter one or quarter two, whatever it happens to be, we're doing a quarterly planning. We've already increased the rate internally. And so we've included that in the price, but I would never in a million years go to a client and say inflation and year end and cost of living and blah, 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 blah. So we're raising our rates. I just would never do that.
Yeah, I can't say never would. I would say I never have. Who knows what the future might hold. I think that, to me, though, the key is to try to find other ways to get that additional revenue.
Yeah, absolutely.
And part of that is just holding the line so you don't have the scope creep. Because if you don't have scope creep on an existing client, you should be becoming more and more efficient at the work that you're doing. So your margin should naturally go up if you remain within the original scope.
Yes.
And so if I need to go back to them, I would prefer to go back to them and say, I need to charge you more because we're beyond the original scope. Right. And that's a much more comfortable conversation to have with someone. Or I'd like to do this new additional thing and charge you for that. And by the way, you can build in a little bit of extra margin in that new work if you're able to pitch it, that then helps correct some of the other bits.
That's exactly right.
But I agree with you. Going back and just saying, on January 1st, I'd like to do the same thing I did for you on December 31st, but I would like to charge you more for it.
Yeah.
I don't love that. And I particularly don't love agencies that have, the built-in 3% escalator or something like that. That's so silly. That is truly nickeling and diming a client, because you're not really making a material difference to your own business. And you're just sort of, just don't do it. If you're going to have a price increase, have a real price increase.
Right. Yeah. And
understand you may lose the business.
You might. For sure.
And if that's okay, great. Because you will hit that point with clients where it may be worth going to them and say, look, the kind of work we're doing, it's different now than when we started working with you 4 years ago. And so these are the minimums that we have. I like you. I'd like to keep working with you. But the only way we can do it is if we get it in line with the kind of business that we're doing now. And if not, no hard feelings. I'll help you find another solution. I'm okay with that, too. I mean, that's a legitimate conversation to have, because it's truly sharing the honest truth that this is a different kind of business that you have now than when you first started working with them.
Yeah, we had a client like that, and the CEO and I are actually very good friends and remain very good friends. But I had that conversation with him, and I remember he put his head down on his desk and was like, "You're killing me," and I'm like, "I'm sorry, I'm running a business too." And so we did part ways from that kind of relationship. But every time that the company's in trouble, there's something that happens on the manufacturing floor. There was actually a shooting at the plant, one of the plants. Like, every time something happens, I'm his first phone call, and he always pays premium rates because they're no longer a client, and he's great to work with. So we've been able to salvage that relationship just from that perspective. But I don't have the monthly retainer from him.
Yeah, and look, I've had those conversations many times over the years with clients that just it's no longer a fit, either because of the size or maybe the kind of work is not what we're doing anymore, whatever it is. And honestly, I've never had one of those go poorly because
No, I haven't either. Right.
most clients understand that when you sit down and have this conversation with them, like, yeah, okay, I kind of know that this is not.
They know.
I've seen what's going on
Right.
here.
They know exactly.
I noticed you've got the fancy new office building, and
Right.
I figured my $200 a month account was probably
Right.
not a good fit anymore.
All right.
And it's just
Yes.
and frankly, you do them a disservice if you've got clients who are super small and not consistent with the rest of the work that you're doing, because you will always neglect them.
Yep.
And so if you don't deal with that at the right time, it will turn into a reputational problem because they will start to badmouth you, even though they understand they are small fry. Nobody likes to be treated like small fry,
Right.
right? If you say, look, it's just not, you're not the right size fry for us, okay, that's a different conversation than you just get ignored.
Right.
Don't do that.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. So don't raise your rates just to raise your rates. Find creative ways to embrace the opportunity with them, and you'll be able to make money that way.
Absolutely. And remember, it's not always about raising rates. Sometimes it's reducing the amount of work. They both
There you
go to the same
That
bottom
does
line.
go to the same.
So,
Does the same thing.
all right. So there are some ideas for how you can keep making money despite the recession and inflation and whatever
Elon
else we
Musk,
get. Whatever. Yeah.
Donald Trump, Kanye West.
And that brings to an end this episode of the Agency Leadership Podcast. I'm Chip Griffin.
I'm Jenny Dietrich.
And it depends.